Project 1065, Chapter 32. Seat meet. You're in my seat. Fritz and I had just sat down at desks in our classroom. Another boy, named Willie, stood over Fritz and demanded he give up his desk. Willie was bigger and stronger than Fritz, but then every boy in class was bigger and stronger than Fritz. Fritz started to get up, but I caught his eye and shook my head. If he was going to learn to be tougher, he was going to start right now. Fritz froze. I could see the fear, the doubt, pass over him like a cloud. But he really must have wanted to join the SRD bad. He slowly sat back down in his seat, his eyes lowered. I said, "You're in my seat," Willie repeated. He gave Fritz a slap that made his head turn. Sock him, I whispered. It was English slang, but Fritz understood. Fritz clenched his fist, screwed his eyes shut, and swung. He landed a punch right to Willie's gut, doubling him over. You little runt, Willie cried. He threw himself at Fritz, and they tumbled into the aisle. Hit him, I told Fritz. Kick him! In seconds, the whole class was there, cheering them on. None of the rest of them cared about Fritz or Willie. They just wanted to see some blood. It was hard to watch. Fritz was a terrible fighter. He flailed about, hardly ever landing a punch. I think he may have even hit himself in the head. I wanted to pull Willie off him, to do the fighting for him, but that wasn't going to teach Fritz anything. What is this? Air Professor Dr. Major Melker cried. He pushed his way through the watching boys and grabbed Fritz and Willie by the ears. Fighting. Always fighting. That's all you monsters ever do. It's what you're bred to do. To fight and die for the Fuhrer. I blinked. Air Professor Dr. Major Melker wasn't saying anything we hadn't heard before. Half the stories we read in our primer were about German boys who had fought and died for the fatherland. The very motto of the Hitler Youth was, "We are born to die for Germany." But there was something in the way Air Professor Dr. Major Melker said it. Like he didn't believe in what he was teaching us anymore. Like he maybe never had. Sit down, all of you. He flung the two boys away so hard I thought he was going to rip their ears off. I had never seen Air Professor Dr. Major Melker this mad before. Fritz slid back into his seat and Willie slunk away. I was worried Fritz would be upset at the beating he took, but when he turned his eyes to look at me, they were alive, and he was grinning wolfishly. He was drunk on confidence. Even though he'd taken a beating, he liked the feeling of fighting back. Sit down and shut up, or I'll beat you until you can't sit down, Air Professor Dr. Major Melker said. A boy in the first row sneezed, and Melcher gave him a wicked smack with his ruler. I was so startled I sat up straight in my chair. Air Professor Dr. Major Melker had always been snappish, but this was different. I could feel the atmosphere in the room grow colder. The eyes of the boys in the class grow narrower. They were monsters, all of them, and monsters didn't like to be bitten by other monsters. Air Professor Dr. Major Melker began class by handing back essays we'd turned in a few days ago, titled The Educational Value of the Reich Labor Service. Boring. There was a lot of grumbling as people got their grades this time, though. Mine was a D. I blinked in amazement. I'd never gotten such a bad grade on an essay before. Mostly because I copied all my essays straight from stupid Nazi propaganda, just like I'd done for this one. Giving me a D on words I'd lifted right out of the German newspapers was like Air Professor Dr. Major Melker saying he disagreed with the official party line. And he did not want to be admitting that in front of a class full of boys who made it their business to rat people out to the Gestapo. There were a lot of questioning looks between the boys before Melker told us to open our biology books to the next chapter. The page had a picture of a healthy Aryan man with good posture standing next to hunchbacked, ugly-looking Untermenschen, subhumans, like Jews, Poles, Russians, and Africans. I slid down in my seat, ready for another ridiculous lecture on the superiority of the German master race. I had what the Germans would call good Sitzfleisch, or Fleisch. It literally translated as seat meat. It meant being able to sit through something long and boring, as if you had a big padded butt. But today's lecture wasn't boring. In fact, what Air Professor Dr. Major Melker said had all of us sitting up in our seats.